Hello, good morning, students. Welcome back to virtual classes. In the previous part of the lesson, we have understood that thousands of refugees would come to the city every day. It was a quite common scene to the city dwellers that thousands of refugees would beg for surviving. They would pull auto rickshaws, and there was some kind of a fear and anxiousness and bitterness towards these refugees by the city people. So they would not look at them, they would not pay any attention. There were a fresh group of refugees. They came in the evening to the city. So, as usual, they did not notice at them. Now, let us continue with the lesson. Page number 161. Turn out to the page number 161, second paragraph. But these were no common men and women, riffraff from some community always poor and easily starving in a flood time. But this group of refugees were quite different from the refugees would come every day. So these refugees were not common men and women who were riffraff. Riffraff means unworthy or not respected by others. These were the people or refugees coming from well to do and respected families. They were not from the community who would always poor and easily go starving during flood time. These were men and women of which any nation might have been proud. You can see that these refugees, a special group who came, they were coming from a different villages due to floods, but they were from the respected family and they lived such a kind of a life that any nation would feel proud to have such kind of a citizens. It could be seen they were all from one region, for they wore garments woven out of the same dark blue cotton stuff, plain and cut in an old fashioned way, the sleeves long and the coats long and full. The men wore smoked aprons, the smoking done in curious, intricate, beautiful designs. And when you closely observe these refugees, they were all coming from the same region. That we can find out by looking at the kind of the dresses that they wore. So they wore the dresses made from same kind of a dark blue cotton cloth. And their dresses or garments were plain and cut in an old fashioned style, and they had a long sleeves and a long coats. And the men, they were also wearing smoked aprons, smoked in the sense some thread like elastic like design which were done on the aprons. Apron is nothing but a loose a shirt like thing which is worn over the dress. And these smoking were done in a beautiful, attractive style. The women had bands of the same plain blue stuff wrapped like kerchiefs about their heads. And when it comes to women wore some kind of a bands like a kerchief on their heads, and again these were made from same dark blue cotton clothes. Both men and women were tall and strong in frame, although the women's feet were bound. When you look at the physical appearance of these men and women, they were strong, they were tall and well built up. And the women's legs were bound. There were a few lads in the throng. In that group, only few boys were there. A few children sitting in the basket slung upon a pole across the shoulders of their fathers but there were no young girls, no young infants. There were some children who would not walk long distances, so they were sitting on the baskets and they were carried by the fathers, so they were slung upon a pole. And but there were no young infants and there were no young girls in the group of refugees that you can see. Every man and every lad bore a burden on his shoulder. When you see every man and every boy, they carried some burden on their shoulders. This burden was always bedding, quilts made of a blue cotton stuff and padded. And the burden which they carried were again it is bedding. When you go outside, when you want to sleep, you require certain blankets or bedspreads or even a thin bed. So they always carried these beddings on their shoulders, and again a beddings were and the quilts is nothing but it is a thick bedspread, so which is made from a deep cotton cloth, and there were pads inside to make a material very thick. So, clothing and bedding were clean and strongly made. When you see the clothings and the beddings, so they were clean and they were quite strong. When we see that, when the quality of the material is good, it is quite expensive. So, from these beddings and the clean cloths, again it is observed that so these were the people. So, they lived very well. They were from a good families. So, on top of every folded quilt, with a bit of mat between, was an iron cauldron. They carried a bedding, so which made from a blue cotton cloth. So there were quilt. Quilt is nothing but again a bedspread, very thick bedspread. And on the top of this quilt, there was a mat, and on that they carried an iron cauldron. Cauldron is nothing but a big vessel which has got a lid and a handle, which is generally used to cook the food. They carried a cauldron also on the top of the bedding. These cauldrons had doubtless been taken from the earthen ovens of the village when the people saw the time had come when they must move. So obviously these cauldrons must have taken from the earthen ovens from the villages. They must have made that because when they saw that it was the time that they can no longer live in their villages, so there were floods which destroyed their lands and houses. There was no food to survive. They were starving, and the only way that they can survive is moving out of their villages. So when they noticed that the time had come to move out of the village in order to survive, so they must have made these cauldrons in order to carry. So, from the earthen, when they but in no basket was there a vestige. Vestige means remains of a food, nor was there a trace of a food having been cooked in them recently. But when you looked at these cauldrons, there were no a little food left in the cauldrons. There was no food at all. Even there were no marks or traces of any food being cooked recently. From that we understand that they did not have any food grinds to cook food, and even they did not have any food to eat. This lack of food was confirmed when one looked closely into the faces of these people. In the first glance, in the twilight, they seemed well enough, but when one looked more closely, one saw they were the faces of the people starving and moving now in despair to a last hope. But when you look at very closely to these people, one can observe that they were starving. Okay, they were starving, they did not have any food for many days. When you look at them in the twilight, in the evening light, twilight means a light which we can see just before the day gets over, in the sense before the sun setting evening. when you see in the twilight, so we observe that they might have been coming from a good families, or they are well enough, but when you look at them very closely, one can observe that they were starving. So they were starving, and they were moving now in a despair, a worry, in a worry that they might die, and they were coming to the city in the last hope of their survival. They saw nothing of the strange sights of a new city because they were too near to death to see anything. So, though there were many beautiful things, attractive things which they had not heard and seen in their life, but they were not looking at any things because they did not have any curiosity. They were thinking that they were almost near to death. They were men and women who had stayed by their land until starvation drove them forth. Thus, they passed unseeing, silent, alien, as those who know themselves dying or alien to the living. So these people, they were stayed in their lands until they were about to die due to starvation. So, because of this, they have moved out of their lands, they have come to the city. That is why they were walking in the streets of the city like very, very silently, and they were quite new to the city. And as if when a person knows his death in advance, so what will be his feeling and what will be his thoughts and mindset in that way, so they are walking in the streets of the city. So we'll continue this lesson in the next video. Thank you.